Okay, so we have moderator Stefan Haase, Whitecap Consulting, long experience in the tech sector, who will introduce the rest of the panel. And I think over to you.
Thank you, and thank you very much for being part of another great SEC event. In regards to fintech, of course, a great time to be in London and in the UK. UK fintech week was awesome. For those of you who don't know, the UK leads 2 tech races globally. Most of them are led in the US and elsewhere, but we lead 2. One's fintech, the other one's Formula 1. So you're part of one, which is obviously great. And we've all seen in the last few years that London is the hub of fintech, or was the hub, but now it's increasingly starting to happen in other parts of the UK. And especially for startups, I'm not saying don't go to London, but you've got opportunities all around the UK. We're going to hear some of those opportunities in a little while in terms of what's happening in different parts of the UK and why would it be interesting to actually be there. So I'm a director at Whitecap. We do a lot in regards to innovation ecosystem and fintech. I'd like to introduce the ladies first. Nicola, if you'd just like to introduce yourself, give a bit of a background in terms of who you are and where you come from.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nicola Anderson. I'm the Chief Exec at Fintech Scotland, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. Fintech Scotland is a cluster management organisation. We have been around for 4 years, and we are charged with helping Scotland recognise the economic value that fintech brings. Working on the financial services heritage that Scotland has, it's the second financial services centre in the UK outside of London. We are building fintech innovation and an ecosystem to help that advance. So I'll be delighted to talk to you a little bit more about that as the afternoon continues.
Thank you. Yusuf, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Yusuf Özdalga. I was actually born in Gothenburg, so my name doesn't really give the hints, but I'm a Göteborgare, yes. So I'm a QED investor. We're a fintech dedicated fund. We have $4.7 billion under management only in fintech. Our latest fund was about $1.1 billion, and it's global. So we invest North America, LATAM, UK and Europe, which I head up, Africa, which we just started, India and Southeast Asia, which we've been doing for about a year. And the team was very heavily tinted towards Capital One, which is where I started my career in '97, building that as a neobank back then, and became a $50 billion top 10 bank in the US, but started as a challenger bank. And we started QED to take a lot of those learnings and help other companies doing that same journey, using data to disrupt banks or to disrupt financial services or innovate products. So that's what we've been doing. We've done about 140 investments, and 28 of those have become unicorns. We were on the board of Cunnane in Sweden, for example, which we left, I think, 6 years ago. So we should have stayed a bit longer, because it's done really well since then. And many other investments with Zopa, ClearScore, and others here in the UK.
Thank you. And finally, Peter.
Oh, hello everyone. I'm Peter Cunnane. I am the Director of International and National Initiatives at Innovate Finance. We are the UK's trade organisation for the global fintech sector here in the UK, and we've just completed 2 days of IFGS over at Guildhall, and we are in the middle of UK Fintech Week. So as you said, a really special time for you all to be here in the UK talking about fintech. My role at the organisation is to connect with those like-minded hubs and businesses around the globe, but also with those like-minded places where fintech is emerging across the UK as well. And it is indeed emerging right across the UK. There's some fairly established centres, which I'm sure we will get on to. Nicola represents, of course, and then there's some new and exciting places, different parts of the UK where fintech is starting to sprout up, which offer opportunities for anyone who's looking at the UK as a whole. So delighted to be here.
Excellent, thank you. As I mentioned, the UK is a great place for fintech, and for the last 10-15 years we've seen lots and lots of innovation, but I think it's fair to say over the last 2 to 3 years there's been a huge amount of effort by the government, by other organisations, to make sure that the joy of fintech is actually spread across the UK. We had the Khalifa report, which said there's some real strength in places across the UK. So it'd be great if you could, the three of you could sort of share your views, because you all represent nicely different parts of the ecosystem, which is great. An overview of what you see really sort of happening across the UK, different programs, initiatives, where you see real opportunity for growth and change. Peter, I don't know if you want to start on that?
Well, the Khalifa review is interesting because it offered us a roadmap, if you will, of the direction for UK fintech. it reflected on much of what happened in recent years that had got us to this point where we have this, global fintech hub here in the country. And what Khalifa Review then did was point to the future and actually what needs to be done in terms of taking that ecosystem and sort of driving it forward. And in particular relevance to this conversation, it actually highlighted a number of emerging places or a number of hubs around the UK where fintech was starting to cluster. There were some very developed places within particular verticals of fintech, but there are actually some quite new and exciting towns and cities around the UK where fintech is relatively new, but it's growing. And I think what Ron Khalifa in particular was keen to see was he wanted to capture a sort of a snapshot of where we were in 2021, but actually to sort of see where it was growing, to see the verticals that are coming through, to see the different kinds of businesses that are emerging in those places, and actually provide us with a roadmap, if you will, for progress. And I think the report captured that. It also had a number of recommendations. I won't go into all of them. There are many, but what we're delighted to see is a year on, many of those recommendations, if they've not been implemented, they're actually in the process of being implemented too. So it's actually got legs, and people are still talking about it, which is great.
Very good. Yusuf, do you want to answer next?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as QED, we've been sort of known each other for 20 plus years, going back to Capital One. But I physically joined QED only 5 years ago to head up UK and Europe, and we chose London as a hub here. And in those 5 years, we made about just in UK and Europe, we made about $180 million worth of investments into 10 companies, approximately 10 companies. And very early stage of Series A average valuation was about 25 million pre, like some were like 7, some were like as high as 40, but early stage. And from those now 2 have become unicorns. So we had prior unicorns like Klarna, etc. But in that 5-year period, we had 2. And interestingly, both were non-UK. So from the 10, 8 are UK-based. One is based in Bulgaria, Payhawk. They just announced their round. And one Wayflyer is based in Dublin, and they also have done a unicorn round. But what's interesting about them is they both sort of chose London as a sort of a hub, if you will, and they both came here for fundraising. So Wayflyer is based in Dublin, but they did a lot of their fundraising, especially early on, in London. And they also have a very strong presence in terms of customers in London, and they cover the UK market out of sort of London and UK. Now, Europe, they covered a little bit out of Dublin, a little out of here. But I think they use that to kind of make this entry point into bigger things, which is, I think, one good insight. The second company, Payhawk, they're based in Bulgaria, and all the developers are in Sofia, and the founders are in Sofia, but they actually incorporated as a UK company. So in a way, it is a UK company, but they're just happen to be based in Sofia. So I think the insight there is, whether you're in Sweden or whatever, there's a great opportunity to use this as a hub. And obviously we're a bit biased, but we see this as the hub in terms of connecting to people, connecting to customers, connecting to capital, and that's really what being an entrepreneur is all about, doing those things, connecting to ideas. And I think London is quite a good place for it, and obviously Scotland and other places in the UK are very good for that. And people do it in different ways, so you can incorporate here and be based in Bulgaria, or incorporate in Dublin but have an office here. There's many permutations, but it's probably a good move, and some of our most successful companies have done that, exactly that.
Nicola?
Thanks. So the Khalifa Review, as Peter says, was a fantastic benchmark, really. It was a milestone, and it provided us with lots of food for thought. It identified 10 clusters across the UK that were really starting to thrive and develop. And that presents us with an opportunity to think about the experience and the skills right across the UK as we develop fintech generally. So if I use Scotland as a cluster, The other thing that we think about as we think about the Khalifa Review and the opportunity that it talked about for the UK was the clusters were establishing, because of their connectivity and closeness and connection to the established financial services centres. And so we're starting to see the financial services businesses themselves move beyond London right across the UK. So I've mentioned Scotland and its connections there already, but we know in Leeds, in Manchester, and the West Midlands, there's also really significant connections there. So these were points that the Khalifa Review was calling out, and it was just an opportunity for us to really take stock and think about what does the breadth of the UK look like as we think about fintech innovation, and how do we connect to drive that forward. So I'm really excited actually about the Khalifa Review. One of the recommendations that Ron Khalifa also offered us was that we should think more about our connectivity and research and development. I'm very happy to share a little bit more about what we're doing on that in Scotland, but we've just published our research and innovation roadmap, and that connects us with the academic communities right across the UK, which again are really important as we think about cluster development and we think about innovation development. Having that type of expertise, particularly as technology evolves, is really important, and that's another important ingredient in the success of the clusters across the UK for innovation. I'm going to pause there because that's
Very good. Thank you. If you look at the UK, a few hundred years ago, the UK was sort of globally leading in regards to engineering and many other areas of industrial development. And then for a long time over the last century, so the UK was sort of, dropped behind many other countries and races, technology races. Why is it that fintech over the last 10 to 15 years is so successful in the UK? Why is it the UK is actually leading on that, in some parts globally? And what is the role of tech innovators, fintech innovators, to actually bring that new innovation into the UK? Do you want to start with this one?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so obviously UK was leading at some point, and I think a lot of nations, cycles, right, depending on commercial trends and macro movements, shifts. So war, as we know, sadly, can be a big driver of innovation, and so the Second World War was a big event, and then the DARPA initiative came out of that, and then Silicon Valley and San Jose and all that. So that gave the US a strong advantage, I think. And I think, there's big cycles like that kind of started in the 50s, 60s, that builds an ecosystem. Angels, a big thing for us is angels. I think angels, as you come here as companies and look to establish yourself in the UK, you have a lot of things like industry bodies, you have people angels is one of the best places, I think, to start getting help, especially at the early stage. US started developing that in the 60s, 70s, including many different ecosystems, Silicon Valley, Boston, and all that. I think UK now was a little behind all that, frankly, in the 70s and 80s, especially, right? But I think recently, especially in the last 10 years, there's been a big change. Starts with the universities, Oxford and all these other great institutions here. They've had a little bit of a revival, if you will. And then at the same time, there's been a big amount of capital coming into private equity and venture capital. And a lot of that has channeled itself into London, right? So the combination of those two things has led to a revival across, I think, all of UK, from Scotland down to London. And I think that is a great opportunity. And then that attracts people, attracts more ideas, more funding for universities. So I think there's a sort of virtuous loop building now in the last 10 years from what we see. Yeah.
Very good. Nicola, do you want to add your?
Yeah. What I would add is actually I think we have a really innovative regulatory environment here in the UK, and I think what we're seeing change in financial services because our regulators are enabling us to think that way, to drive that change. I know you've spoken to the FCA today, and I can see FCA colleagues, ex-colleagues I should say, in the audience, but the innovation environment within the FCA and the leadership of innovation across the regulator, I think, has enabled us to really test, to think about, to work in collaboration and partnership with the regulator as policy develops to allow us to really innovate in financial services. And the second point I would add, Stefan, is actually we have a strong heritage in financial services here in the UK, and our really stand proud in the UK about our innovation capabilities and our innovation heritage. And as I take us back to Scotland and I think about some of the innovations that have come from Scotland that aren't perhaps in the finance sector, but nonetheless, we have that capability, that mindset, that innovative mindset to really drive through that change. And we're seeing that continue. So that expertise in innovation, iteration and evolving financial services heritage and regulation have really coupled those 3 points together in addition to investment are helping us drive.
Very good. Peter, do you want to add to that?
Just to build on a point Yusuf made, actually, the catalyst for change often comes from crisis, and you know, all those things that Nicola's just laid out in terms of the context of where the UK is absolutely spot on. But if you think back to 2008 and the financial crisis, a lot of talented individuals in financial services decided that they wanted change and they wanted to work in a world that was better. They wanted to work in an industry that did things better. And using the technological changes that we were seeing at that time to connect consumers to products, to businesses, very much a catalyst at that point. And we've seen it again more recently over the last couple of years with the connectivity between individuals driven by digital transformation during COVID, that inability to connect one-to-one or person-to-person has also proved quite a catalyst. And I think fintech during this period has proved itself, has proved a certain level of maturity in terms of how it now drives change across other areas of the economy, and how it has also helped governments around the globe to get money out quickly to those areas of the economy where it's needed. And I think fintech's had a real sort of role to play there as well.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. My next question is more in regards to sort of UK regions and different cities in the UK. I know from a, let's say, American or Chinese, even Swedish viewpoint, Edinburgh to London is, it's just, there's nothing, is it? There's no distance because we're quite a small country overall. Those countries think, well, that's just a small train ride away, isn't it? That's not even a distance, it's a suburb of London, isn't it? We've seen over the last sort of 10, 20 years, a lot of the cities around the UK being revitalised, not just financial service, but from the universities, investment in actual city centres, driving other economies again. The question I have is, what do you see going forward, the role of the various UK regions and cities and hubs and London? How do you see that evolve over the next 10 years to where we started from 20, 30 years ago to where we are now, and then looking into the next 10 years? How do you see that developing? How do you see London and Northern Ireland, Scotland, and then you've got the different large UK cities, English cities like Leeds, Manchester, Newcastle, Sheffield, Birmingham, Bristol. How do you see that evolving? Peter, do you want to start with that one?
I think London's role very much is the shop window to the UK and as the home to the hub for many of our fintech businesses, but also many of our financial services and the investors as well. It's got that reputation, it's got those strengths which really sort of drive other areas of the financial services economy. What we're seeing though, in terms of the emergence of those 10 clusters around the UK, is an appetite at a more local level to connect to that ecosystem. And of course now through COVID again, it's become easier because now you don't have to get on a train to London to meet a VC. You can have it, do it over a video call. And I think that connectivity has really improved over the last couple of years. So that's driving change. But I think some of the other towns, cities across the UK, they can offer something different to different businesses and different sort of subsectors within fintech as well. We're seeing great strengths in crypto and related technology in Northern Ireland, in insurance in Wales, in payments and lending across the north of England. I'm not going to talk about Scotland, I'll let Nicola to do that part. But great innovation there too, and I think that's sort of distinguishing sort of different flavours, if you will, of fintech. It's really helping propel the UK picture as a whole.
Very good. Yusuf, what's your view?
Yeah, no, I mean, so I was just talking to my colleagues in the US, and they were just flying to San Francisco now to go visit some of our companies, and we're saying how few of the companies are actually now in San Francisco. So in the US, actually, New York is actually emerging as more of a fintech center. And I think globally, you would probably say New York and London, at least on this Western Hemisphere, are like the two major fintech centers. Having said that, during COVID, a lot of people moved to Miami. And likewise here, in my portfolio, one of the founders is based in Brighton, right? And when you do go to Brighton, actually, you got the hills, you got this creative, more edgy, sadly, some almost, it looks like San Francisco in many ways with the hills, except the weather, obviously. But when the sun shines, you almost feel like you are in San Francisco sometimes. So you'll have these like local areas, right, across the UK. And that's the same. So New York is probably the hub in the US for fintech in many ways, especially the more fin side of fintech. And then, you know, you'll have, again, Miami, we'll have Atlanta, a lot of, like, one Irish company went to Atlanta, and so on. So same here, right? And I wouldn't call it hub and spoke, it's more this, like a more, like a shop front window makes a lot of sense. And then you have people that choose Brighton because it's cheaper, nicer, this, that, right? And that's very normal.
Yeah, I would agree with that actually. I think we are here to complement each other and to work and collaborate. And we have that connectivity across the UK that we're really lucky to do so. So you mentioned, your question, Stefan, was about some of those cities and what do they bring. So I can pick up on a couple of points there. So with Edinburgh and some of the investment that's gone into data-driven innovation in Edinburgh, we can see fintech innovation that's learning from other innovators who are focused on other types of data-driven innovation, and that's really swelling the fintech opportunity. And that just helps support what's happening in London. That doesn't take away from what's happening in London. And then as I think about Glasgow and some of the investment that's about to come into Glasgow and some of the innovation focus from a UK government perspective, Glasgow is going to become a centre for services innovation, and we will see more of that. And again, fintech becomes another opportunity there, and that again just helps us swell what we're doing in the UK and complements what's happening in London. And Pete picked up on a couple of other important trends across other aspects of the UK, and we work really hard across the Fintech National Network to connect those levels of expertise so that the tide rises for everyone, really. That's the way we look at it.
Very good. I've got some background in technology for the last 25 years, and when I look at fintech, I always think, in most cases, 90% of it is tech, only 10% is fin. But fintech has been a pioneer in many, many cases, driving new developments, new technologies into old legacy environments, horrible databases, horrible systems, process didn't work, and trying to break some of those up and actually deliver new things. But as we're moving now into a world where everything's changing, where we know sustainability, net zero is a massive, massive issue, health tech is a massive, massive issue. What are the learnings that companies can take from fintech and actually apply to various sectors? And where do you see the kind of the overlap where, you know, looking at green finance and other areas where fintech is actually still leading, but reaching out to other sectors and kind of collaborating more across the board to drive a more holistic approach into, you know, solving some of the problems that we've faced, not just in the UK, but obviously globally. Who wants to start on that one?
Please.
Thank you. So I think that point about cross-sector innovation, cross-sector learning is vital, and that will serve us all well as we think about that. So a couple of specific examples, I suppose, that we have seen. So the oil and gas sector in Scotland is really prevalent, and there's lots of capability and innovation in tech in that sector. And it's a heavily regulated sector, similar to financial services. So we're seeing those capabilities in reg tech, in oil and gas and financial services, be able to be applied in both those different verticals. That's one clear example. The other example that I personally find fascinating is the work that's happening in space and space data, and how we, again, we're seeing this evolve in Scotland, but how that kind of data has an application in the green finance agenda, helping us build confidence in our ESG credentials that many of those investment houses will want to be confident about. So we're
embedded fintech or embedded finance, as we call it. And that's basically, I mean, if you have a marketplace or you have some customers and you're a sort of non-fintech company yourself, you can embed fintech easier and easier. So the example I used was there's two versions of the same business I saw. One was like 3 years ahead. The one 3 years ahead had spent like $3 million to build their product, and the one that came 3 years later could do it for like 300,000. And now it's even cheaper. Like this embedded it's getting easier to embed fintech in everything you do. And actually, we're now seeing reverse embedded fintech, which basically means that some people start with a fintech proposition. So they say, we'll give you lending, we'll do your payments, we'll do something fintech for you. And then on top of that, they start building a marketplace, or they start building non-fintech products on top of it. So we've seen this in logistics. They start with, maybe giving some sort of payment fuel card to truckers, and then they start doing services, logistic services for truckers, and so we've done a lot of like shirt tech and trucking tech because of this in the US, pretty interesting. So like that embedded and reverse embedded fintech is quite an interesting thing that we're seeing.
Thank you. Peter, do you want to add anything?
All I say is that you touched on green in your comments, and I think that's again it's about how these products and services can rise to the challenge or the challenges that we face. And I think that's the lessons learned in terms of the development of some of those products is where we see that crossover into other areas of the economy. And green is a really good example of where we're seeing that. I mean, the stuff around space is fascinating.
Yeah. Thank you. I think we've got time for one final question. In our experience, the UK is quite welcoming to innovation from around the world. Probably more than any other sort of large European economy. Language, of course, helps, but I think in general there's a real sort of appreciation for innovation, for trying new things. If you could give one or two pieces of advice to these great entrepreneurs, innovators out here, in terms of what is it that they could or should be doing when they're considering an entry into the UK marketplace, and how could and should they engage with larger organizations, corporates, sometimes larger than you see in other economies. What's your advice? One or two pieces of advice?
Sure, I'll jump in. Yeah, I mean, so for good innovation, you need sort of people, capital, right, and ideas, right? And if you're friendly to people, coming friendly to capital and friendly to ideas, free speech, and all this, then you'll get that. So that's not. I think that's the main thing I would recommend is probably angels, especially from this perspective of coming, is you can connect the funds and so on, and there's always going to be many funds. I think the first entry point, depending on your stage, obviously, is finding good angel investors, or it could be advisors, could be mentors. They don't have to invest per se, but somebody who's taking an interest. Could be somebody who's retired from a bank and they sort of have free time on their hands. Could be somebody who's retired from a fund. Could be somebody who exited their investment and have money and is investing a lot. There's people like that, but finding the right angels is I think the best place to focus your time. I think if you have one thing to do, that's what I would say.
Mentors is that really rings true in terms of finding that right partner. It could be finding a peer, finding someone that's at an equivalent stage to you already in the market, maybe someone that's grown their business in the UK, that's doing similar things to you, and getting learnings from them. One of the major words I've heard around the global summit the last couple of days is partnerships. That seems to be back on the table now in terms of a buzzword. And I think there's a real openness here in the UK in particular to partnerships, particularly amongst the traditional legacy incumbents, whatever you want to call them, financial services businesses. There seems to be a lot more room for engagement now. So connecting with potential partners is always going to be key as well.
Ruth, Nicola?
I would say think about connecting with the clusters across the UK. I think the points that have been made already are very, very valid and absolutely critical. But a cluster connection will help you accelerate those points. So if you were coming to Fintech Scotland, for example, we would help you connect within the fintech community quite quickly. We have 30 different strategic partners, all of the financial services institutions you would expect, as well as technology businesses, professional services organisations, all contributing to the cluster. We would help you with those connections and that type of network. We would help you with connections with Scottish Government, with the regulator, with the investor community, where we have those relationships. So you will find that type of hub in one of the clusters that will make that easier for you to engage across the UK. So engage with one of the clusters would be one of the points that I would make.
Thank you. Well, we welcome you all, and thank you, Nicola, Yusuf, and Peter, for their great insights.